abuse at the hands of police officers who she should have been able to trust has caused anger and distress across the country. On Monday, the Policing Minister failed to answer 4 separate questions in this chamber, asking when he first knew about Child Q and what urgent action he took in response. So I asked the Prime Minister, when did he first hear about the strip search of Child Q in her school, and whether he believes that the characteristic dither and delay of his government in responding to this appalling case is remotely acceptable when it comes to the safety of children.
Mr. Speaker, I think that is a completely ridiculous characterisation of the response of the government, because of course, the reports of this incident are deeply distressing and deeply concerning. Everybody shares her feelings about that, Mr. Speaker. But the Metropolitan Police have rightly apologised, and the IOPC is investigating, and for that reason, it would not be right to comment further.
Sir Oliver Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. People across North East Hertfordshire are coming together to provide support and refuge to families fleeing the invasion in Ukraine. The Baldock and District Action Committee are about to welcome 4 families to our community. And doesn't he agree with me that this shows the open-hearted generosity of the British people? And will he continue to do all that he can with the Refugees Minister to make this process as simple and speedy as possible?
Prime Minister.
I thank my honourable friend, and I also thank all those involved in the 2 big schemes that we have now for welcoming people from Ukraine. And the Homes for Ukraine scheme is now open. I think about 40,000 have already applied. 150,000 homes across this country, families across this country have said they want to welcome Ukrainians. That's a fantastic thing. I thank Baldock and District for helping to lead the way.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 800 loyal British workers fired over Zoom, instantly replaced by foreign agency workers shipped in on less than the minimum wage. If the Prime Minister can't stop that, what's the point of his government?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we condemn the callous behaviour of P&O, and I think that it is no way to treat hard-working employees, and I can tell him that we will not sit by, Mr. Speaker, because under Section 194 of the Trades Union and Labour Relations Act of 1992, it looks to me, Mr. Speaker, as though the company concerned has broken the law. And we will be taking action, therefore, and we will be encouraging workers themselves to take action under the 1996 Employment Rights Act. Both acts, Mr. Speaker, passed by Conservative governments. And if the company is found guilty, then they face fines running into millions of pounds, Mr. Speaker. And in addition, we will be taking steps to protect all mariners who are working in UK waters and ensure that they are all paid the living wage, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, when Owen Paterson was on the ropes, the Prime Minister was prepared to rip up the entire rulebook to save his jobs. P&O workers want him to show the same fight in relation to them. The government had advance warning of these mass sackings. A memo was sent to the Transport Secretary and to the Prime Minister's office, but they didn't lift a finger to stop them. Did the Prime Minister not understand the memo, or did he just not bother to read it?
Prime Minister.
I think what the right honourable gentleman needs to rip up, Mr. Speaker, is his pre-scripted questions, because I've just answered the question, and the point at issue, Mr. Speaker, is whether or not the government was properly notified, and it's not about what happens the previous evening. I knew about it on the Thursday it became public. But the company concerned has a duty to notify the government 45 days, Mr. Speaker, before they take action of that kind. That is why we're taking the action that we are to protect hard-working people. And what we're also also doing, by the way, Mr. Speaker, this month is lifting the living wage for all workers across our country by another £1,000. So it's up £5,000 since 2015.
Keir Starmer.
I think the Prime Minister just said he knew about it on the day.
Yeah.
I take it from that answer the Prime Minister didn't read his WhatsApp briefing.
Surely not.
Let's test his rhetoric. Mr. Speaker, since the Prime Minister came to office, P&O have received over £38 million of government contracts. And the parent company, DP World, is lined up for £50 million of taxpayers' money under the Freeport scheme. The government is apparently reviewing these contracts, but reviews don't save jobs. Can the Prime Minister guarantee that these companies will not get a penny more of taxpayers' money or a single tax break until they reinstate the workforce?
Mr. Speaker, I think what the House has already heard is that we are taking legal action against the company concerned under the 1992 Employment and Trades Union and Labour Relation Act, and that is the right thing to do, because it seems to me, Mr. Speaker, that they have broken the law. But if he's asking this government to do what Labour usually want us to do and actively pitchfork away investment around the country from overseas, Mr. Speaker, then that is not what we will do. We'll take them to court, we'll defend the rights of British workers. What we will not do, Mr. Speaker, is launch a wholehearted campaign, as they would want, against overseas investment, because that is completely wrong, and wrong for those workers, Mr. Speaker.
Well, DP World must be quaking in their boots. The Prime Minister says how disappointed he is in them whilst handing them £50 million. Prime Minister said about the law, speaking of hollow reviews, as the law stands, it's not illegal to pay seafarers below the national minimum wage, even if they're working out of UK ports and in UK waters. 2 years ago, Prime Minister, his government admitted that that was unjustifiable 2 years ago, and promised 2 years ago, you've guessed it, to review it. 2 years on, despite what he says today, nothing's been done, leaving the gate wide open for P&O. British workers don't need another empty review, they need action. So when will the Prime Minister fix that gap in the law?
Mr. Speaker, with great humility, I must ask the right honourable gentleman to listen to the answer that I gave to the first question, because it would then help him to scrap his third or fourth question and try another one. We are going to address the defects in the 1998 Living Wage Act, Minimum Wage Act, and make sure that everybody serving in the UK exclusive economic zone, working in the UK exclusive economic zone, gets paid the living wage as people do in the rest of the country.
Here's Starmer.
The problem is that's what he said 2 years ago. It didn't happen, and P&O took advantage of the gap left wide open by this Prime Minister. Yes. P&O's behaviour comes off the back of a string of fire and rehire cases. Profitable companies threatening to fire workers unless they accept a pay cut. The Prime Minister keeps telling us just how opposed he is to fire and rehire. But as we saw on Monday, Mr. Speaker, as we saw on Monday, he doesn't have the backbone to ban it. Whilst he sits on his hands, more and more workers are having their lives thrown upside down by this appalling practice. What good to them is a Prime Minister who's all mouth and no trousers?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the most notable practitioners of fire and rehire are, of course, the Labour Party themselves. He may be interested to know we will be vindicating the rights of British workers, UK employees under UK law. But the law that the P&O, the company themselves, are allegedly relying on was introduced, I can tell him, as a result of EU directives. never forget, Mr. Speaker, and he may not like it, that's the reality. He would have kept us unable to change it, unable to get out of it. He would have made it impossible for us to protect UK employees in the way that we're going to do. But what we're doing, Mr. Speaker, above all, is ensuring that workers in this country have the best protection of all, which is a job, Mr. Speaker. And under this government, thanks to the steps that we have taken, thanks to the stewardship of the economy by my right honourable friend, which you'll be hearing about in a little bit more, Mr. Speaker, we have people in payroll employment, 600,000 more of them than before the pandemic began.
Keir Starmer.
He can complain all he likes, but on Monday, he ordered all of his lot to abstain on a vote to ban, fire and rehire. And they all did. And then, Mr. Speaker, to add insult to injury, after the vote, his party posted a message saying that, where possible, they will look to find P&O workers new jobs. Pathetic. They don't want new jobs. They want their old jobs back. They don't want a Prime Minister hoisting the white flag. They want him to fight for their livelihoods. 82,000 seafarers in this country. I've spoken to dockers, engineers, deckhands and sailors. They're all worried about what this means for them. This morning, one of them said to me, if P&O can get away with this, other companies will get rid of us too and replace us with cheap labour from abroad. Why does the Prime Minister think that they will take a crumb of comfort from his half-assed bluster and waffle today?
Mr. Speaker, P&O plainly aren't going to get away with it any more than any other company that treats its employees in that scandalous way, Mr. Speaker. And this is a historic moment for this country, actually, because it's now 2 years since 2 years to the day that we went into lockdown. And that plunged this country into the biggest, deepest loss of output that we've seen in our lifetimes. And thanks to the Chancellor, who protected the economy, who protected jobs, who protected companies, we've now been able to come out faster and more effectively than any other comparable economy. We have unemployment back down to 3.9%. We have 600,000 more people on the payroll, Mr. Speaker. And the best assurance we can give workers around the country is that the economy is now bigger than it was before the pandemic began. And we will continue to get the big calls right, as we got the big calls right during the pandemic. They got the big calls wrong. They would do absolutely nothing to protect workers, let alone P&O workers, Mr. Speaker, because not only would they have kept us in lockdown and kept those ships in port, Mr. Speaker, unable to move, that's the reality, kept those ships in port, but, Mr. Speaker, there has never been a Labour government that left office with unemployment lower than when they began. That is the reality, and that's their record on jobs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I strongly support the government's intention to make England smoke-free by 2030, but on the current trajectory, we're going to miss that target. It is vital that we encourage or discourage young people from starting to smoke and encourage people that smoke already to give up. So does my right honourable friend agree with me that it's now time to raise the age of legal sale of tobacco products from 18 to 21 and impose a levy on the profits of the big tobacco companies to raise £700 million that we can put to smoking cessation services on the basis that the polluter must pay?
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. He's absolutely right about smoking. It's the biggest single cause of preventable death in this country. As he'll know, Javed Khan OBE is undertaking an independent review of smoking, and I'm sure he will want to take my honourable friend's suggestions into account.
SNP spokesperson leader of the SNP in Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In a matter of seconds at 12:16, an aircraft is due to depart Heathrow Airport, a Virgin Atlantic aircraft, to go to Warsaw to pick up 50 young orphans that have left Ukraine, that are coming to spend the next period of their life in Scotland with the sanctuary that we can offer them. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank everyone that has helped to make sure that we can offer a new start to these young people away from the war, and in particular the governments in London and in Edinburgh, and in particular to thank the Immigration Minister, the member for Torbay, and the Refugee Minister in the House of Lords, Lord Harrington. This is a good day for these 50 young people, but let's hope that it's the beginning of something much more significant for many more young people that we can offer sanctuary to. Mr. Speaker, this morning we have official confirmation that inflation is at its highest level in 30 years. But families don't need official confirmation to know that the cost of food and energy are now at a price they simply can't afford. The very people who have borne the brunt of the health pandemic are now being hammered by the poverty pandemic. This is not just a cost of living crisis, this is an emergency. That is why in Scotland the SNP government is doubling the Scottish child payment and raising benefits it controls by 6%, double the rate the Chancellor has proposed for the benefits he has control over. So this is a very simple question for the Prime Minister. If he truly understands that this is an emergency, will he match the Scottish Government's commitment and lift all benefits by 6%?
Prime Minister.
I thank him very much. And we all recognise the inflation, global inflation, is causing a real cost of living crisis, not just here but around the world. In the US, inflation is now running at more than 8%, where at the levels in other European countries. We're doing everything we can to help people. The Chancellor's put another £9.1 billion into reducing the cost of energy for families. But I don't know quite what he's shouting out, Mr. Speaker, but we want to do more. And Scotland, I can tell him, is in the lead in helping this country to solve its energy problems, not just with more offshore wind, Mr. Speaker, but by abandoning the phobia of our own hydrocarbons, which I think are going to be vital for transition and avoid us being blackmailed by Putin's Russia. And on his point about the orphans, Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to him for his efforts. I thank him, and it's another example, if I may say, without embarrassing him further, of the burgeoning cooperation between us.
Well, of course, Mr. Speaker, we want to make sure we open our doors in Scotland and welcome refugees, that we have that generosity of spirit, but we'll leave that there for now. Can I say to the Prime Minister that inflation is at 6% and increasing? We need to make sure that those the most vulnerable have that increase in benefits that they need in order to pay for fuel. And the Chancellor needs to ditch the official photographer and listen to Martin Lewis. Family finances are at breaking point. They can't tighten their budgets anymore. These families have no room for manoeuvre. But the truth is that the Chancellor does. Yep, exactly. Lower borrowing and increased taxes means that he's sitting with £28 billion to spend today. But instead, this Chancellor is making a political choice. The choice to push people further into hardship by hiking taxes, cutting universal credit, and giving companies free rein to slash workers' pay through fire and rehire. So the test for the Prime Minister is this. Will the government use the full £20 billion they are sitting on to scrap the national insurance tax hike and put money into people's pockets? Or will we simply make this Tory poverty pandemic even worse?
Prime Minister.
Right, well, I just advise Mystic Meg over here that we have only, he has only 10 minutes to wait before he'll have the answer to that question, Mr. Speaker.
Ian Sturdy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I warmly welcome the improvements to our national Ukraine refugee response. But in the weeks since these improved measures, numbers fleeing Putin's invasion have sadly doubled to 3.5 million and are expected to go even higher. So does the Prime Minister agree our response must still move much, much faster, with a shift to processing applications in the UK, cutting the red tape and bureaucracy, so we can match the scale of Europe's worst humanitarian crisis since the Second World War?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think he's right that we are going to see many more people coming here, and he's right that the instincts of this country are to be as generous as possible, and that's why we've made sure that applications can now be processed online very quickly, Mr. Speaker, so people can come here with their passports. And under the family reunion scheme alone, I think the numbers are now running in excess of 16,000 people coming here.
Kenny McCaskill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Whilst Ofgem can cap rising gas and electricity bills, other fuels such as heating oil, LPG and solid fuel remain unregulated. Many households in rural Scotland depend on such fuels. There are also areas awash with energy, both on and offshore, yet with huge and rising numbers in fuel poverty. Will the Prime Minister regulate and cap such fuels to alleviate hardship and end the perversity of energy-rich Scotland but fuel-poor Scots?
Well, I thank him very much, and I think he's right that energy-rich Scotland and the hydrocarbons that we have in this country should be used to help the British people, and that we shouldn't be needlessly reliant on oil and gas from Putin's Russia. And I think that's the policy of Alba, and unfortunately it's not yet the policy of the SNP.
Jason McCartney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm so proud to represent a vibrant Ukrainian community in Huddersfield and Colne Valley. And this Friday at the Ukrainian Club in Huddersfield, they'll be collecting medical supply donations to send to Ukraine and the surrounding nations. Will the Prime Minister join me in thanking all of our community in West Yorkshire who have rallied round their Ukrainian neighbours and friends, and also continue to put the UK at the forefront of donations of not only humanitarian and medical supplies, but also the military aid that is allowing the Ukrainian people to fight so bravely against Putin and his cronies?
Prime Minister.
I thank you very much. I thank the Ukrainian community in Yorkshire for everything they're doing. Of course, the Ukrainian communities up and down the country, and the people of this country as a whole. I am proud that we are the biggest bilateral donor, I think, other than the United States, in aid to Ukraine. And yes, I'm also proud, as I know the whole House is, of the work that is being done continuously to give the Ukrainians the tools they need to defend themselves.
Graham Stringer.
Mr. Speaker, the Football Association are refusing to move the semi-final between Liverpool and Manchester City from Wembley. There are no trains from the northwest that day, which means 50 or 60,000 people will have to go by road. Bad for the fans, bad for the environment. Unfortunately, this is typical of the insensitivity of the FA, who think that fit and proper people to run our football clubs are Russian kleptocrats and people who are wanted for human rights abuses. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that now is the time to legislate to set up an independent regulator for football with fan involvement?
Prime Minister.
I thank you very much. I'm not going to comment on the travel arrangements for the particular match, though the deputy leader of the Labour Party shouts for me to secure her a train. I'll do. I'm sure that everybody has heard the FA will have heard the message that he's given. But what I can say, Mr. Speaker, is I do agree with my honourable friend who's just conducted a review on the matter. That we should indeed have an independent regulator for football.
Olinda Bicroft.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, is a great champion for steel, and we've just had brilliant news on the removal of the US steel tariffs. Will he reaffirm the commitment he made at the dispatch box on the 31st of January that the Chancellor will bring forward a package of measures on our steel energy costs? And if the Chancellor isn't able to make good on that commitment today, will he ensure he does so as soon as he can?
Prime Minister.
I agree with her passionately, and I think that it is vital that we undo the damage done by the insane policies of the Labour government, the previous Labour government, that whacked up the cost of energy for British industry, including steel. I will be bringing forward a British energy security strategy, Mr. Speaker, that will address the needs of British steel, British ceramics, and the whole of British industry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure the Prime Minister will share my delight that Bradford has been shortlisted to be the UK City of Culture 2025 and will want to offer his support for our bid. It would bring immense benefits and kudos to Britain's youngest city. With over 120 languages spoken across Bradford, its unique cultural heritage, diversity and let's not forget the amazing food, the birthplace of David Hockney and the Brontes, Bradford has it all. Apart from, Mr. Speaker, government support. One practical way in which he could help is reverse the Transport Secretary's snub to Bradford in the integrated rail plan. So I ask the Prime Minister, will he look again at this and commit to delivering a real Northern powerhouse rail, including a stop in Bradford City?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I congratulate Bradford on being shortlisted in the way that that wonderful city has been, but I think she's wrong about what the integrated rail plan said, because already it's committing to cut the journey time, just from memory, from Leeds to Bradford from 20 minutes to 12 minutes, if I remember correctly. And Mr. Speaker, we are continuing to look at ways of making sure that high-speed rail goes direct to Bradford.
Alan Kern.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The horrifying events in Ukraine must be central to our focus, and we should do all possible to stand together in support. A war in Europe also has challenging domestic outcomes, with higher energy costs, rising food prices, and effects on supplies and inflation and across the economy in general. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that this is a time where we need to come together as a nation, and anyone seeking to weaponise Putin's deliberate and calculated consequences of the war will only undermine the unity of our nation at a time when Europe is in crisis?
Prime Minister.
I thank my right honourable friend very much for what he has said, and I think that one of the most important things that has confounded Vladimir Putin has not only been the resistance of the Ukrainians, the heroic resistance of the Ukrainians, but the unity of the rest of the world, and I must say so far, the relative unity, the important unity of this House.
Rebecca Long-Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has been very supportive of nuclear testing veterans, so I'm sure he will be shocked that today the Mirror has uncovered 140 pages of data previously hidden in a footnote of a 1988 government report. There's now concern that the High Court and this House may have been inadvertently misinformed in 2008 when told that only 159 men in UK nuclear weapons tests were exposed to dangerous radiation, when today's data shows exposure numbers were actually 2,314. Will he urgently investigate this and arrange to meet personally in Downing Street with my constituent, her granddad and other nuclear testing veterans to bring an end to this national scandal?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank the honourable member very much for bringing those facts, new facts to the attention of the House, and I know that my office has already been in touch with the group concerned to make sure that we have a proper meeting, and I hope very much that she will be there and we'll be able to discuss all the issues that she's raised.
Percy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I begin by thanking the Government and the Home Secretary, in particular as Chair of the APPG on surrogacy, for her work to bring Ukrainian surrogates to safety here. Sadly, in my role as Chair of the APPG on anti-Semitism, the news isn't so positive. We heard from Jewish students recently who are suffering record anti-Semitic attacks on university campuses, including allegations of them being marked down by their own professors. This is completely outrageous, and you would expect the NUS to be on their side, but instead of helping those students, the NUS has been inviting somebody who is engaged in anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, a rapper, to a conference. Can the Prime Minister do everything in his power to ensure campuses are a safe place for British Jewish students?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think that our universities for far too long have been tolerant of casual or indeed systematic anti-Semitism, and that's why it is very important that we now have, and I hope that everybody understands the need for change and for rapid and irreversible change, but it's also important that we have an anti-Semitism task force devoted to rooting out anti-Semitism in education at all levels.
Mary Kelly-Foy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, the government did nothing to stop P&O ferries sacking 800 seafarers on the spot. On the same day, the Work and Pensions Minister was forced to come to the House to announce over 1,100 DWP job losses and 42 centre closures, risking a further 7,000 jobs, including 1,300 in the North East. Working people are once again being hammered by this government in the middle of a cost of living crisis, causing genuine suffering. Why won't the Prime Minister act to protect local communities from losing real high-quality jobs?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I renew my sympathies with the case of with the P&O workers, and I've explained to the House what we're doing, and we will. But what we're also doing, Mr. Speaker, is helping the workforce up and down the country to get the coaching they need. We've doubled the number of work coaches, Mr. Speaker, and what we're seeing is employment climbing. We're seeing vacancies growing. Mr. Speaker, we are helping this country into work, and that's what Conservatives do.
Steve Bryan.
Go about their lives or even get to work because their driving licences are stuck at the DVLA. Would the Prime Minister make it clear at the dispatch box that the service from the agency falls significantly below what we expect? And would he ask the Transport Secretary to meet with me and any other member of this House? I think we may need a big room to explain how we can help them out of the hole they've put themselves in.
Absolutely. Prime Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I think, like everybody in this House, I've read some surprising things about what's been going on at the DVLA. I do think that we need to make sure that they're given every possible encouragement and support to expedite the supply of driving licences to the people of this country.
Weston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's nice to see the Prime Minister back. I missed him last week. A fantasy castle, perhaps Snow White too. Certainly girls, girls, girls were promised at a party. Less burlesque, more Berlusconi. According to a former minister, it seems the Prime Minister has been entertained at these bunga parties, hosted by his close friend, a Russian oligarch. Given his many weaknesses, could leave him open to blackmail. Why does the Prime Minister think that MI6... Why does the Prime Minister think that MI6 may not entirely trust him?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid I missed. Last week I wasn't here to benefit from one of his elaborately confected questions. I admire his style, Mr. Speaker. I'm afraid I simply failed to detect any crouton of substance in the minestrone of nonsense that he just spoke of.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Wrexham is a town based on brewing, mining and football, a town evolving in aspiration, prosperity and creativity whilst retaining its Welsh identity. Can the Prime Minister congratulate Wrexham on being shortlisted for the City of Culture? And if he were to win, it would be the first Welsh town to do so.
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, Wrexham's not only the city of shortlisted for the City of Culture and with all the distinctions that she mentions, but it is also the city of vaccines, Mr. Speaker. Because without the AstraZeneca vaccines bottled in Wrexham, we wouldn't be literally wouldn't be where we are today.
Mr. Speaker, former Treasury Minister Lord Agnew has described the Chancellor's failure on COVID fraud as one of the most colossal cock-ups in recent government management, and taxpayers are paying for it. We now know the Chancellor's failure has cost the country £11.8 billion, almost exactly the same as the amount national insurance is going to be increased on working people in the coming year. Does the Prime Minister think it is fair to demand working people pay the bill for the Chancellor's failures?
Mr. Speaker, I remember him when he was doing planning at Islington Council, and a complete cock-up he made of that. What I can tell him is that this government has made sure that we got the PPE, we got the supplies that were needed in record time, and that was absolutely vital. And at a time, Mr. Speaker, when they were calling on us to go further and faster. And never forget, under the last Labour government, there was £23 billion lost in fraud every year.
Angela Richardson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the important interim report from Dr. Hilary Cass, in which she highlights the need for more research into our young girls, why so many of them are presenting with gender distress. Will my right honourable friend agree to meet with me and other concerned colleagues and to discuss how we can constructively support these young people who are experiencing gender distress?
Prime Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I would be very happy to meet with my honourable friend, and I think that this is one of those issues that the whole House is coming to realise is one that requires extreme sensitivity, tact, love and care. We must recognise that when people want to make a transition in their lives, that they should be treated with the maximum possible generosity and respect. And we have systems in this country that allow that and have done for a long time. We should be very proud of it. But I do want to say, in addition, Mr. Speaker, that I think when it comes to distinguishing between a man and a woman, that the basic facts of biology remain overwhelmingly important, Mr. Speaker.
The Prime Minister met the chairman of P&O owners, DP World, to discuss setting up a free port in London. And just last year, the Foreign Secretary met DP World as well. DP World run ports in the UK which employ more than 600 workers. So if the Prime Minister wants to remove the latest suspicion of his conflicts of interest, will he tell his Dubai millionaire friends that if they want contracts to run free ports here, they must reinstate P&O workers and guarantee the jobs of DP World workers too?
We need to use more moderate and temperate language in this chamber. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I have one overwhelming interest, and that is to protect and preserve the jobs and livelihood of the British people. And that's what we're doing. And that's what we'll do with the P&O workers, but we'll also make sure that we continue to attract overseas investment in the record ways that we currently are. They would drive it away. We won't, Mr. Speaker.
Shall Schwartz.
This year marks the 50th anniversary of the expulsion of Asians from Uganda, the country where I was born. Under Ted Heath's government, people across the country opened up their homes for many of these Asians, who then settled and became part of the fabric of our great nation. That British generosity is again being seen as people open up their homes for people fleeing Ukraine as they come to our country. May I urge the Prime Minister to pick up those files from 50 years ago, wipe off the dust, and take on board those positive lessons so we can ensure that the Homes for Ukraine scheme has the maximum success.
Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and I think the whole country can be proud of the way the UK welcome people fleeing Idi Amin's Uganda, and I'm sure that there are many members of the House, or several members of the House, and I know the Home Secretary herself, her family was a beneficiary of that scheme and that moment. This country is overwhelmingly generous to people fleeing in fear of their lives. We will continue to be so.
800 British workers sacked over Zoom by P&O, owned by the government of Dubai, to be replaced with foreign exploited agency workers on less than £2 an hour. The Prime Minister can pass an instrument now to close the loophole so that the national minimum wage applies on UK international routes. Is he going to stand up for British workers or the oil state dictator Dubai?
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful for his question, and I knew he was going to ask it, and he was right to ask it. I anticipated his question earlier on. We're going to make sure that everybody working in the UK exclusive economic zone gets paid the living wage, and Mr. Speaker, we'll do it as fast as we possibly can with their assistance.
The Elphick.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the Prime Minister's commitment to take legal action to hold P&O Ferries and DP World to account. And I call again on them to reverse their action and reinstate the workers. But Dover and Kent are already badly affected by this business, including on the roads and business community. Will my right honourable friend meet with me to discuss specific support for our affected area, including the A2 upgrade for the National Transport links and the East Kent Enterprise Zone to cover and include the Port of Dover?
Mr. Speaker, she's right in what she says about P&O and about the 800 workers, and I will make sure that she gets all the meetings she needs to make sure that Dover, we continue with all our fantastic investments in Dover, whether transport or education or otherwise.
We're just going to give it a minute for people to leave before we start the statement. Anyone who wants to leave, please leave now. Let's clear the benches. Right, we now come to the Spring Statement. I now call the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak.
Mr. Speaker, as I stand here, men, women and children are huddled in basements across Ukraine seeking protection. Soldiers and citizens alike have taken up arms to defend their land and families. The sorrow we feel for their suffering and admiration for their bravery is only matched by the gratitude we feel for the security in which we live. And what underpins that security is the strength of our economy. It gives us the ability to fund the armed forces we need to maintain our liberty, the resources we need to support our allies, the power to impose sanctions which cause severe economic costs, and the flexibility to support businesses and individuals through crises as they emerge. But, Mr. Speaker, we should be in no doubt. Behind Putin's invasion is a dangerous calculation that democracies are divided, politically weak and economically insecure, incapable of making tough long-term decisions to strengthen our economies. Mr. Speaker, this calculation is mistaken. What the authoritarian mind perceives as division, we know are the passionate disagreements at the heart of our living, breathing democracy. What they see as chaos, we know is the freedom to be dynamic and innovative. And what they call the inherent weakness of open societies and free economies, we know is the source of our strength. We will confront this challenge to our values, not just in the arms and resources we send to Ukraine, but in strengthening our economy here at home. So when I talk about security, yes, I mean responding to the war in Ukraine, but I also mean the security of a faster growing economy, the security of more resilient public finances, and security for working families as we help with the cost of living. Mr. Speaker, today's statement, builds a stronger, more secure economy for the United Kingdom. We have a moral responsibility to use our economic strength to support Ukraine and working with international partners to impose severe costs on Putin's regime. We are supplying military aid to help Ukraine defend its borders, providing around £400 million in economic and humanitarian aid, as well as up to $500 million in multilateral financial guarantees, and launching the new Homes for Ukraine scheme to make sure those forced to flee have a route to safety here in the UK. And we are imposing sanctions of unprecedented scale and scope. We sanctioned over 1,000 individuals, entities and subsidiaries, frozen the assets of major Russian banks, imposed punitive tariffs on tea products, restricted Russia's access to sterling clearing, to insurance, to the UK's capital markets, to SWIFT, and we've targeted the Russian central bank too. Be in no doubt, these sanctions, coordinated with our allies, are working. The Russian ruble plummeted to record lows. The Moscow Stock Exchange has been largely suspended for a month, and the Central Bank of Russia has been forced to more than double interest rates to 20%. We warned that an aggressive, unprovoked invasion would be met with severe economic costs, and it has. I'm proud to say, as the whole House will say, we stand with Ukraine. But, Mr. Speaker, the actions we have taken to sanction Putin's regime are not cost-free for us at home. The invasion of Ukraine presents a risk to our recovery, as it does to countries around the world. We came into this crisis with our economy growing faster than expected, with the UK having the highest growth rate in the G7 last year. But the OBR has said specifically, there is unusually high uncertainty around the outlook. It is too early to know the full impact of the Ukraine war on the UK economy. But their initial view, combined with high global inflation and continuing supply chain pressures, means the OBR now forecasts growth this year of 3.8%. The OBR then expect the economy to grow by 1.8% in 2023 and 2.1%, 1.8% and 1.7% in the following 3 years. The House will take comfort that the lower growth outlook has not affected our strong jobs performance. Unemployment is now forecast to be lower in every year of the forecast. It is already at 3.9%, back to the low levels we saw before the pandemic. But, Mr. Speaker, the war's most significant impact domestically is on the cost of living. COVID and global factors meant goods and energy prices were already high. Statistics published this morning show that inflation in February was 6.2%, lower than the US and broadly in line with the euro area. Disruptions to global supply chains and energy markets, combined with the economic response to Putin's aggression, mean the OBR expect inflation to rise further, averaging 7.4% this year. As I said last month, the government will support the British people as they deal with the rising costs of energy. People should know that we will stand by them as we have throughout the last 2 years. That's why we've announced a £9 billion plan to help around 28 million households pay around half the April increase in the energy price cap. And people should be reassured that the energy price cap will protect their energy bills between now and the autumn. But I want to help people now, so I'm announcing 3 immediate measures. First, I'm going to help motorists. Today, I can announce, for only the second time in 20 years, fuel duty will be cut. Yeah. Not by 1, not even by 2, but by 5 pence per litre. Yeah. The biggest cut to all fuel duty rates ever. And while some have called for the cut to last until August, I have decided it will be in place until March next year, a full 12 months. Together with the freeze, it's a tax cut this year for hard-working families and businesses worth over £5 billion. And it will take effect from 6 p.m. tonight. Second, as energy costs rise, we know that energy efficiency will make a big difference to bills. But if homeowners want to install energy-saving materials, at the moment, only some items qualify for a 5% VAT relief, and there are complex rules about who is eligible. The relief used to be more generous, but from 2019, the European Court of Justice required us to restrict its eligibility. But thanks to Brexit, we're no longer constrained by EU law. So I can announce for the next 5 years, homeowners having materials like solar panels, heat pumps or insulation installed will no longer pay 5% VAT, they will pay 0. We will also reverse the EU's decision to take wind and water turbines out of scope and zero-rate them as well. And we will abolish all the red tape imposed on us by the EU. A family having a solar panel set installed will see tax savings worth £1,000 and savings on their energy bill of over £300 per year. And Mr. Speaker, this policy highlights the deficiencies in the Northern Ireland Protocol, because we won't immediately be able to apply it to Northern Ireland. But we will be raising it with the Commission as a matter of urgency. And I want to reassure members from Northern Ireland that the Executive will receive a Barnett share of the value of the relief until it can be introduced UK-wide. And the Prime Minister will bring forward further measures to reinforce our long-term energy security in the coming weeks. And finally, I want to do more to help our most vulnerable households with rising costs. They need targeted support. So I am doubling the Household Support Fund to £1 billion with £500 million of new funding. Local authorities, Mr. Speaker, are best placed to help those in need in their local areas, and they will receive this funding from April. Mr. Speaker, we can only afford to provide this extra support because of our stronger economy and the tough but responsible decisions we've taken to rebuild our fiscal resilience. Today's forecasts confirm, even after the measures I'm announcing today, we are meeting all our fiscal rules. Underlying debt is expected to fall steadily from 83.5% of GDP in 2022-23 to 79.8% in 26-27. Borrowing as a percentage of GDP is 5.4% this year, 3.9% next year, then 1.9%, 1.3%, 1.2% and 1.1% in the following years. At a time when the OBR have said that our fiscal headroom could be wiped out by relatively small changes to the economic outlook, it is right that the central fiscal judgment I am making today is to meet our fiscal rules with a margin of safety. The OBR have not accounted for the full impacts of the war in Ukraine, and we should be prepared for the economy and public finances to worsen potentially significantly. And the cost of borrowing is continuing to rise. In the next financial year, we are forecast to spend £83 billion on debt interest, the highest on record, and almost 4 times the amount we spent last year. That's why, Mr. Speaker, we have already taken difficult decisions with the public finances, and that's why we will continue to weigh carefully calls for additional public spending. More borrowing is not cost or risk-free. I said it last autumn, and I say it again today. Borrowing down, debt down. Only the Conservatives can be trusted with taxpayers' money. So, Mr. Speaker, our response to the immediate crisis in Ukraine has been unwavering. But we must be equally bold in response to the deeper and more fundamental challenge Putin poses to our values. We must show the world that freedom and democracy remain the best route to peace, prosperity and happiness. We will do so by strengthening our economy here at home. To that end, we are helping families with the cost of living, creating the conditions for accelerated growth and productivity, and making sure the proceeds of growth are shared fairly. That is not the work of any one statement, but it does begin today, and with one of our most important levers, the tax system. I told the House last autumn my overarching ambition was to reduce taxes by the end of this Parliament. And we will do so in a way that is responsible and sustainable. Today, I am publishing a tax plan. We will take a principled approach to cutting taxes, maintaining space against our fiscal rules, as I have done today, continuing to be disciplined, with the first call on any extra resources being lower taxes, not higher spending, and of course, carefully considering the broader macroeconomic outlook. With those principles in mind, our new tax plan will build a stronger economy by reducing and reforming taxes over this Parliament in 3 ways. First, we will help families with the cost of living. Second, we will create the conditions for higher growth. And third, we will share the proceeds of growth fairly, ensuring people are left with more of their own money. Let me take each in turn. Mr. Speaker, there is now a dedicated funding source for the country's top priority, the NHS and social care, providing funding over the long term as demand grows, with every penny going straight to health and care. If it goes, then so does the funding, and that funding is needed now, especially as my right honourable friend, the Health Secretary's plans to reform healthcare will ensure every pound of taxpayers' money is well spent. When I said the Conservatives were the party of public services, the party of the NHS, I didn't just mean when it was easy, it is a total commitment. So it is right that the health and care levy stays, but a long-term funding solution for the NHS and social care is not incompatible with reducing taxes on working families. Over the last decade, it has been a Conservative mission to promote tax cuts for working people and simplify the system. That's why Conservative-led governments raised the income tax personal allowance from £6,500 in 2010 to the new level of £12,570. But the equivalent thresholds in national insurance, which define how much people can earn NICS-free, are still around £3,000 less. Now, the Prime Minister pledged in the 2019 election we would increase those thresholds. We made a big step towards that goal in my first budget in 2020, increasing the national insurance threshold to £9,500. Today, we take the next step. Our current plan is to increase the NICS threshold this year by £300. But I'm not going to do that, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to increase it by the full £3,000. Delivering our promise to fully equalise the NICS and income tax thresholds, and not incrementally over many years, but in one go this year. From this July, people will be able to earn £12,570 a year without paying a single penny of income tax or national insurance. That is a £6 billion personal tax cut for 30 million people across the United Kingdom. A tax cut for employees worth over £330 a year, the largest increase in a basic rate threshold ever, and the largest single personal tax cut in a decade. The Institute for Fiscal Studies has called it the best way to help low and middle earners through the tax system. It creates what the Centre for Policy Studies has called a universal working income. It is a tax cut that rewards work. And Mr. Speaker, around 70% of all workers will have their taxes cut by more than the amount they'll pay through the new levy. Once again showing it is this Conservative government delivering for hard-working families and helping with the cost of living. So, Mr. Speaker, the first part of our tax plan for a stronger economy is to support families with the cost of living. But as I set out in last month's May's lecture, to lift our growth and productivity, we need the private sector to train more, invest more and innovate more. People, capital, ideas. That's how we'll create a new culture of enterprise, the second part of our tax plan. The plan sets out tax-cutting options on business investment and innovation, with final decisions to be announced in the autumn budget. But these are significant and complex questions, so we will work with businesses over the summer to get the answers right. Let me explain to the House the direction of travel. First, people. We lag international peers in adult technical skills. Just 18% of 25 to 64-year-olds hold vocational qualifications, a third lower than the OECD average. And UK employers spend just half the European average on training their employees. So we will consider whether the current tax system, including the operation of the apprenticeship levy, is doing enough to incentivise businesses to invest in the right kinds of training. Second, ideas. Over the last 50 years, innovation drove around half the UK's productivity growth. But since the financial crisis, the rate of increase has slowed more than in other countries, and our lower rate of innovation explains almost all our productivity gap with the United States. Right now, we know that the amount businesses spend on R&D as a percentage of GDP is less than half the OECD average. And that is despite us spending more on tax reliefs than almost every other country. Something is not working. So we'll reform R&D tax credits so that they're effective and better value for money. We'll expand the generosity of the reliefs to include data, cloud computing and pure maths. And we'll consider in the autumn whether to make the R&D expenditure credit more generous. Third, capital. Weak private sector investment is a long-standing cause of our productivity gap internationally. Capital investment by UK businesses is considerably lower than the OECD average of 14%. And it accounts for fully half our productivity gap with France and Germany. Once the super deduction ends next year, our overall tax treatment for capital investment will be far less generous than other advanced economies. We're going to fix that. In the autumn budget, we will cut the tax rates on business investment. And I look forward to discussing the best ways to do that with businesses. People, capital, ideas. 3 priorities for business tax cuts this autumn. But, Mr. Speaker, I want to help smaller businesses right now. So let me remind the House of our plan. Our business rates discount will take effect in April for retail, hospitality and leisure businesses. They will get a 50% discount on their business rates bill up to £110,000. A typical pub will save £5,000. That's a tax cut for hundreds of thousands of small businesses worth £1.7 billion, taking effect in just a week's time. Our Help to Grow management scheme offers businesses mini MBAs, 90% funded by government, a benefit worth several £1,000s. Help to Grow Digital gives businesses a 50% discount on buying new software, up to £5,000. We've also increased the annual investment allowance to £1 million so that small and medium-sized businesses will feel the benefit of full expensing. But, Mr. Speaker, I want to respond to the specific calls from small businesses with one further announcement today. The employment allowance cuts small businesses' tax bills, making it cheaper to employ workers. In my first budget 2 years ago, I increased that allowance. Today, I'm going further. From April, the employment allowance will increase to £5,000. That's a new tax cut worth up to £1,000 for 500,000 small businesses starting in just 2 weeks' time. So, Mr. Speaker, future tax cuts on business investment and innovation, a business rates discount worth £1.7 billion, help to grow schemes worth thousands of pounds per business, an annual investment allowance worth up to £1 million, and a new tax cut on the cost of employment worth £1,000 per company. Once again, Mr. Speaker, it is this Conservative government delivering for British business. Mr. Speaker, the tax plan I've announced today will help people and businesses deal with rising costs, will help raise the future growth rate of this country. But we want the proceeds of growth shared fairly, the third objective of our tax plan. The knowledge you can keep more of what you earn is a powerful incentive for people to work hard. It means greater economic security, and we know that individuals spend their money better than governments do. We've already announced today the equalisation of personal tax thresholds, giving over 30 million workers a tax cut worth over £330. And over time, I want to go further. But tax cuts must be paid for, they must be prioritised, and they must fit the economic circumstances of the time. A clear goal for Conservative Chancellors, and even some Labour ones, has been to cut income tax. The fact this has happened only twice in 20 years tells you how hard it is to do. COVID and the war in Ukraine have only added to the difficulty of achieving this by the end of this Parliament. I'm sure all members of this House recognise and understand those challenges. It would clearly be irresponsible to meet this ambition this year, and yet I refuse to let that ambition wither and drift. By 2024, the OBR currently expect inflation to be back under control, debt falling sustainably, and the economy growing. Our fiscal rules are met with a clear margin of safety. And so my final announcement today is this. I can confirm before the end of this Parliament in 2024, for the first time in 16 years, the basic rate of income tax will be cut from 20 to 19 pence in the pound. A tax cut for workers, for pensioners, for savers. A £5 billion tax cut for 30 million people. And let me be clear with the House, it is fully costed and fully paid for in the plans announced today. Last year, I told the House I would cut taxes for hard-working families, but I would do so in a responsible and sustainable way. And today, I am delivering on that promise. So let me say this. Cutting taxes is not easy. It requires hard work, prioritisation, and the willingness to make difficult and often unpopular arguments elsewhere. It is only because this government has been prepared to make those difficult but responsible choices to fix our public finances that I can stand here and tell this House that not only are taxes being cut, but the debt is also falling whilst public spending is increasing. This doesn't happen by accident, Mr. Speaker. We can deliver for the British people today and into the future because, unlike the party opposite, we have a plan. A plan that reforms and improves public services. A plan to grow our economy. A plan to level up across the United Kingdom. A plan that helps families with the cost of living. And yes, a tax plan. that cuts taxes on working families by over £330, cuts taxes on fuel by 5 pence a litre, cuts taxes on business, and yes, for the first time in a long time, cuts income tax. Mr. Speaker, let me end by simply saying this. My tax plan delivers the biggest net cut to personal taxes in over a quarter of a century, and I commend it to this House.
And quite rightly, the House heard the Chancellor. I now want to show the same respect to the shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer. Rachel Reeves.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today was the day that the Chancellor could have put a windfall tax on oil and gas producers to provide real help to families. But he didn't. Today was the day the Chancellor could have set out a proper plan to support businesses and create good jobs. Exactly. But he didn't. Yeah. Today was the day that he could have properly scrapped his national insurance hike. Yeah. He didn't. We said it was the wrong tax at the wrong time, the wrong choice. Today, the Chancellor has finally admitted he got that one wrong. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Inflation is at its highest level for 30 years and rising. Energy prices at record highs. Yeah. People are worried sick. Yeah. For all his words, it is clear that the Chancellor does not understand the scale of the challenge. Exactly. He talks about providing security for working families, but his choices are making the cost of living crisis worse, not better. Mr. Speaker, the situation following Putin's criminal assault on Ukraine remains gravely serious. Just 1 month after the invasion, so much has changed, with repercussions for years to come. But the Chancellor has failed today to explain why he chose to sign off on a reduction in our country's armed forces last October. Will the Chancellor confirm if the government's target army size is still being reduced by 10,000 troops? And let me say this to the Chancellor. Labour will support whatever is needed on defence and security to keep our country safe. Mr. Speaker, the tremors following Putin's aggression will impact on Britain, including economically. But the cost of living crisis predates Putin's attack on Ukraine. In October, inflation was already forecast to be double the Bank of England's target. And yet the Prime Minister said that fears of inflation were unfounded. Today we learned that inflation has reached 6.2% and is expected to go higher in the coming months. People are rightly looking to their government to help them weather this storm. Labour will support sensible measures to ease this pressure. But what the Chancellor has announced today says everything we need to know about his priorities. The cost of living crisis is hitting people particularly hard because incomes have been squeezed during the last 12 years of Conservative governments. Ordinary families, disabled people, pensioners, facing really difficult choices. Mums skipping meals so that their children don't. Families struggling to buy new school shoes and uniforms for their children. Older people hesitating to put the heating on because they're worried about the cost. At the weekend, the Chancellor was asked about fuel poverty, and he didn't even know the numbers. It is shameful that he doesn't, because when Martin Lewis predicts that 10 million people could be pushed into fuel poverty, the Chancellor should sit up and listen. And we know that pensions and security are not going to keep up with inflation. Pensioners and those on social security will be getting a real terms cut in their incomes.
Cutting the pension.
So what analysis has the Chancellor done on the impact of benefits being uprated by less than inflation? How many more children and pensioners will drift into poverty because of the choices of this government?
Cutting the pension.
And who does the Chancellor prioritise? he continues to defend the record profits of oil and gas producers, who themselves admit that they have more money than they know what to do with. BP describes this crisis as a cash machine for them, but it is British people who are paying out. And it is deeply regrettable that the SNP have joined the Tories in wanting to shield oil and gas producers from Labour's progressive measures. When I set out Labour's plans for a windfall tax in January, we estimated that it would have raised £1.2 billion. Now, because of the continued rise in global oil and gas prices, it would today raise over £3 billion. That's money that could be used to help families and pensioners and businesses. With a cut to VAT, a real Brexit dividend that would help working families and pensioners across our country. And a targeted warm homes discount that would see families and pensioners on the lowest and modest incomes being supported by £600. Now, today the Chancellor comes along after 12 years of failure on energy efficiency and announces a VAT cut on building materials. This is wholly inadequate. A proper energy efficiency scheme, like the one we have set out, could cut bills by £400 to people from next year. And the silence from the Chancellor on our energy-intensive manufacturing industries is appalling. At this time of national crisis, people and businesses need a government that is on their side. Now, the Chancellor spoke of difficult choices, and I agree. There are always choices to be made, like who to tax and who to shield. Despite the Chancellor's reluctant measures, the facts are that he is still taking money out of people's purses and wallets with an increase in national insurance contributions. The changes that he is making today begs the question, why did he embark on these changes in the first place, despite the warnings from the Labour Party and from many, many others? Now, it's one thing for the Prime Minister and Chancellor to disagree with each other, but the centrepiece of the statement that the Chancellor has delivered today is based on a disagreement with himself. And for all his tax rising on millions in the middle, where is the increased tax contribution for the very wealthiest in society? A landlord with a large number of properties won't be paying a penny more in taxes, but their tenants will. Someone with significant income from buying and selling stocks and shares won't be paying any more in tax. But those people powering our economy will. The Chancellor has made the wrong choices. Now, the Chancellor says we can't help everyone, and that's absolutely true. But who has the Chancellor been helping out? Those who have been swindling the taxpayer. The Chancellor left open the vaults for widespread waste, crony contracts and a frenzy of fraud. It was, as his former Tory Treasury Minister put it, happy days if you are a crook. 7 billion items of PPE not usable and now being burnt. Taxpayers' money literally going up in smoke. £3.5 billion worth of contracts awarded to friends, donors and pub landlords. And it gets worse. The Chancellor has been signing cheques to fraudsters, including organised criminals and drug dealers. Let's put the Chancellor's fraud failure in context. He has lost a staggering £11.8 billion of public money to fraud. This is twice the amount that a previous Conservative government lost on Black Wednesday. As a result of, let's face it, this jaw-dropping incompetence, the Conservatives have been funding crime instead of fighting it. And now the Chancellor has the audacity to come to British taxpayers asking them to pay more to fill his black hole. But there can be no cover-up to hide political embarrassment. Let's call in the National Crime Agency to investigate. We need answers, people held to account, because let's be clear, taxpayers want their money back. The truth is, Mr. Speaker, people can no longer afford the Conservatives. Working families can't, pensioners can't, and businesses can't. The weak growth forecast we've seen today should be flashing red on the Chancellor's desk. And the Chancellor says, in his statement today, that the work starts today. Is he serious? The Conservatives have been in government now for 12 years. Not 12 hours. What has taken them so long? Because since his party entered government, the UK has experienced the biggest downgrade in growth of any major economy. With the last Labour government, economic growth was 2.1% a year. Under the last 12 years of the Conservatives, it's averaged 1.5%. And now we know that growth has been downgraded this year too. Now, growth is essential for funding our public services, keeping taxes under control, and keeping a handle on public finances too. That's why Labour have announced a tough set of fiscal rules to get our debt and our deficit down. But the truth is that because of this government's failure to get the economy growing, it's this Chancellor that has to put up taxes on families and businesses a staggering 15 times. This Chancellor has raised taxes more in the last 2 years than any previous Chancellor in the last 50. Now, he says it's all down to the pandemic, but the truth is the Conservatives have become the party of high taxation because they are the party of low growth. Now, I understand that the Chancellor has a portrait of Nigel Lawson above his desk. Well, today we've got an energy price crisis. Record prices at the pumps, inflation is back. The truth is, he's not Nigel Lawson, Mr. Speaker. He's Ted Heath. With an Instagram account. Labour would be getting the economy firing on all cylinders, ensuring that we buy, make and sell more in Britain, scrapping business rates and replacing them with a fairer system fit for the 21st century, something that small businesses and high street businesses are crying out for, and the Chancellor mentioned it not at all in his statement today. A climate investment pledge to decarbonise the economy, create good jobs in every part of Britain and strengthen our energy security too. Businesses are seeing unprecedented increases in their costs right now. But all we hear from this Chancellor today is a promise of jam tomorrow, rather than the support that is needed now. And today's statement lacks the long-term plan for productivity, skills and growth. Where is it, Chancellor? Mr. Speaker, I can't help but feel that in both the Chancellor's recent May's lecture and in his statement today, we are presented with increasingly incredible claims. Perhaps the Chancellor has been taking inspiration from the characters in Alice in Wonderland. Or should I say, Alice in Sunak Land? Because nothing here is quite as it seems either. It's the sort of place where a Chancellor celebrates giving people £200 to help them with their spiralling energy bills before explaining that he needs it all back. In Sunak Land, the Chancellor proclaims, "I believe in lower taxes," while at the same time as hiking Alice's national insurance contributions. So Alice asks the Chancellor, when did lower taxes mean higher taxes? Has down really become the new up? The Chancellor follows Humpty Dumpty's advice and says, when I use a word, it means just what I choose it to mean, neither more nor less. Now, Alice knows that under the Conservatives, taxes are at their highest lowest level in decades as a result of the policies of this very same Chancellor. In fact, this Chancellor was the only G7 finance minister to raise taxes on working people during this crucial year of recovery. Curiouser and curiouser. As Alice climbs out of the rabbit hole to leave Sunak land, she recalls the words of the White Rabbit and concludes that perhaps the Chancellor's reality is just different from yours. The actual reality, Mr. Speaker, is that this Chancellor's failure to back a windfall tax and his stubborn desire to pursue a national insurance tax rise are the wrong choices. In 8 days' time, people's energy bills will be rising by 54%. 2 weeks today, the Chancellor's latest tax hike will start hitting working people and their employers. His national insurance tax rise was a bad idea last September, and he's admitted it's an even worse one today. The Chancellor is making an historic mistake. Today was the day to scrap the tax rise on jobs. Today was the day to bring forward a windfall tax. Today was the day for the Chancellor to set out a plan to support British businesses. But on the basis of the statement today and the misguided choices of this Chancellor, families and businesses will from now on endure significant hardship as a result. The Chancellor has failed to appreciate the scale of the challenge that we face, and yet again he is making the wrong choices for our country.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the honourable lady for her reply, as she raised a number of points which I'll of course come into in due course. But I must say, listening to her statement, it did sound as if COVID and the huge damage that it had done to our economy and public finances had never actually happened. It sounded as if we didn't need to do things like furlough or support businesses and provide emergency funding to schools, the councils and, yes, the NHS. Because whilst her party supported all of those policies at the time, they now seem unwilling to pay for them. And there is a pattern there, Mr. Speaker. They're always happy to spend taxpayers' money, just not take care of it. Mr. Speaker, just briefly address some of the specific points that the honourable lady mentioned. I thought it's telling that she opened her statement yet again calling for a windfall tax. We know on this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, we want to encourage more investment in the North Sea. We want more domestic energy, we want more jobs for the UK, and a windfall tax would put that off, which is why the Prime Minister will be bringing forward a comprehensive energy security strategy in the coming weeks to address that. She talked about business rates and supporting businesses, Mr. Speaker. In just a week's time, small businesses will be getting a 50% discount on their business rates bill in the retail, hospitality and leisure sector. That's the biggest tax cut to business rates outside of coronavirus since the business rate system was created. £1.7 billion. And I know she's said that she would like to abolish business rates. She also says she has some fiscal rules. I haven't quite figured out where she's going to pay for the £25 billion of tax cuts that involves, but I look forward to hearing it. She talked about defence spending, Mr. Speaker, and I must say here, I mean, it's all very well to talk about the size of the army. At least the party opposite now seems to think that we should actually have an army, which is a welcome conversion, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it was because how seriously we take this nation's security, Mr. Speaker, that in 2020, when we decided to do just short-term spending settlements for most departments, there was one department we singled out for special treatment, one department that got a 4-year settlement in advance of everyone else, and that was the Ministry of Defence, Mr. Speaker. And in that settlement, they received £24 billion of new cash, the largest uplift to defence spending since the end of the Cold War, ensuring that we are not just the second largest spender in Europe in NATO, but the 5th largest in the world, a record that we on this side of the House are very proud of. She talked also, Mr. Speaker, about pensions again. Thanks to the actions of this government since 2010, Conservative-led government, we put in place the triple lock. Not something that the party opposite ever did when they were in power. It means that pensions are now £2,300 higher than they were in 2010 and £700 more than if the triple lock hadn't been in existence during that time. And I'm pleased to say, Mr. Speaker, that the state pension now, relative to earnings, is at the highest level it has been in over 30 years. This party will always be on the side of pensioners, Mr. Speaker. And then just briefly to turn to her comments on tax. And I'm not sure, perhaps, if she... fair enough, it's a short time to respond, Mr. Speaker. If she fully understood the implications of the tax cut that was announced today. The increase in national insurance thresholds to fully equalise them is a £6 billion tax cut for 30 million UK workers. It is the largest increase in thresholds ever, the biggest personal tax cut in a decade, and it is worth £330 for those workers, Mr. Speaker. And it means, and this is the part that I don't know if she's realised, because she talked about the levy and making sure that we direct our policy at those who need our help. There's a reason the Independent Institute for Fiscal Studies called this the best way to help low and middle earners through the tax system, and that is because 70% of workers will pay less tax, even accounting for the levy, Mr. Speaker. It is more generous than the policy she is advocating. And combined with the other tax cuts we've announced today, Mr. Speaker, as I said, this plan represents the biggest net cut to personal taxes in a quarter of a century. Mr. Speaker, let me conclude by saying this. The plan that we've announced today, as I said, has only been possible because we have taken tough decisions with the public finances, and not necessarily always popular, but always responsible and always honest. It is 2 years to the day, Mr. Speaker, that the country first entered lockdown and suffered the biggest economic shock in over 300 years. An unprecedented collective national effort was undertaken, and 2 years later, this government hasn't only fixed the public finances, but people are back in jobs, debt is falling, and taxes are now being cut. Now, no government gets every call right. We learn from our mistakes. We strive to improve. But even if they won't admit it, Mr. Speaker, members opposite will recognise this day as an achievement which we all can celebrate. I've said it before to the party opposite, and I'll say it again. There is a fine line between reasonable criticism and political opportunism, and in my experience, the British people can always tell the difference.
Other in the House, Sir Peter Bottomley.
I think the Shadow Chancellor's remarks were best remembered when she pointed out the Conservatives won the 2010 election and we won the 2019 election, and it's probably a very good thing for the country that we did. The Chancellor has met the major obligations, which have public spending, which helps the economy to grow, which allows for more jobs and more government revenue coming in. And he's also concentrated, he's pointed out just now, that the changes to national insurance do the things that Martin Lewis would applaud, as well as the institutes. And if you have those three people supporting, so my support, I may say so, it's very welcome. Can I point out to him, ask him to remember that pensioners don't just have the state pension, many of them have fixed pensions on top. And getting inflation down as fast as possible is vitally important to them. They can't go for a bigger pay increase if they're not at work. And can I finally say to him that some areas of public spending don't make it easy to have efficiencies. If teachers' salaries make up most of the cost of education, it's very important to make sure that we don't squeeze education and wreck our schools and the future for the pupils. On things like cladding, when amendments come to the Building Safety Bill from the Lords, can he please not keep his purse completely shut, but if money needs advancing so that people's homes can be safe and saleable, please consider that openly.
Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable friend for his support, and I think he's right to highlight some of the independent commentators who have supported the policies announced today. I'll just touch on one of the things he said, which is about education spending. I agree with him. It's vital for our country's future that we support our teachers and support our children. That's why the Prime Minister announced in total £5 billion of catch-up funding to help those children with the recover the learning that they lost during the pandemic. Also why we're raising per pupil cash amounts by £1,500 over this Parliament and raising teachers' starting salaries to £30,000 £100,000 as our manifesto committed to.
Now comes the SNP spokesperson, Alison Poulos.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Well, Mr Speaker, this tax plan that the Chancellor announced is very thin, it is lightweight and it is superficial, and it's exactly what we've come to expect from this Chancellor. Because what we heard today from the Chancellor was not enough. It was utterly detached from the needs of our constituents up and down these islands. This has been a cost of living crisis over a decade in the making, layer upon layer. Austerity, which stripped back public services and punished people through brutal social security cuts. Brexit, which has driven away skilled workers and increased cost for businesses and for individuals. COVID, where we saw public money splurged in its billions on crony contracts, while some people were entirely excluded from support. And now those who got support under SACE are expected to pay tax on it, just to add insult to injury. And now home energy costs, which were already soaring before the increase in hostilities in Ukraine, are forcing households to the brink. Inflation running at 6.2%, its highest in 30 years, hitting the poorest hardest. Food prices rising, especially for the basics, and food banks seeing record numbers of people coming through their doors. The Chancellor said he's going to increase the household support fund, but really, is that it? Is that it? Because people are desperate and they need a good deal more help than that. Mr Speaker, we know that sanctioning Russia is not cost-free, but the Tories cannot use this as a sleight of hand to distract from the layers of pain which lie beneath the current crisis. Each of these layers has seen political choices and opportunities for change squandered by this UK Tory government and its predecessors, and we see this again today. And this Chancellor has increased taxes more in 2 years than Gordon Brown did in 10, while people are struggling. The Treasury Select Committee issued a report this morning, and it says that the UK Government must take further action to support UK households, in particular those on lower incomes, to manage the subsequent rise in energy and other costs. Now, his announcement on NICs is welcome. We've been calling for it for years. It's not something that the Chancellor should have brought today. It's something he should have brought a long time ago. And hiking national insurance is a tax on individuals, but also, Mr Speaker, a tax on jobs. Employers are already facing increased costs in energy and materials, and this is a pressure that many businesses will not be able to bear. SMEs in particular need more support. Hospitality and tourism in particular have struggled through the pandemic, and now the Chancellor is moving VAT from 12.5% back to 20% at a time when consumers have much less money in their pockets. We in these benches called for this cut before the Chancellor brought it in, and we support the UK Hospitality's VAT's Enough campaign. Mr Speaker, cutting universal credit by £20 a week at a time when people need it the most. Carly, a single mum, spoke at the gingerbread reception on Monday and told us all how important it was that that money was there, because things are tighter than they have ever been. No further support for people on legacy benefits and disabled people who often face higher energy costs and have no option in those costs. A taper put in place that only helps people that are in work. Benefits just not going far enough as they don't keep pace with inflation, and a welfare cap that punishes people for their circumstances. And an end to the triple lock, and nothing for the waspy women outside campaigning yet today, still losing out on what should have rightfully been theirs. The Scottish Government, by contrast, is doing what it can within its limited budget to support people, uprating the 8 Scottish social security benefits that we control by 6%, increasing the Scottish child payment to £20 a week, a lifeline to families. This Government should be doing the same. 5p off fuel is something, but it doesn't help those who are paying for trains and buses. The Chancellor cut air passenger duty during COP26, but he still offers nothing for the millions of commuters who use public transport every day. Mr Speaker, I don't know if the Chancellor has ever had a prepayment meter. I don't think they fit them. I don't think they fit them, Mr Speaker, for swimming pools. But 4.5 million people across these islands. She says it's pathetic. 4.5 million people across these islands. 4.5 2.5 million people across these islands experiencing the stress and despair of watching the money run out on their prepayment meters. Prepayment customers, Mr Speaker, already pay higher bills than those in direct debit, and they may struggle even to access the Chancellor's Heat Now, Pay Later loan if it doesn't go automatically to pay back the debts on that meter. Mr Speaker, the Fuel Bank Foundation, who provide top-ups to those who are struggling on prepayment meters, have seen a 75% increase in demand already. That's before the prices we are seeing now. Nothing either from the Chancellor on customers on heating oil or LPG who must fill up by the tank. And those on heating oil have seen their tank costs for 500 litres in a tank go from £250 to between £600 and £900. These people have no choice about how they get that energy. Where are they in the Chancellor's priorities today? Mr Speaker, nuclear, which the government touted an awful lot before the statement today and was missing from the Chancellor's statement, interestingly, is not the answer to reducing people's bills. It is slow and it is eye-wateringly expensive. We know already from the nuclear financing bill that what the government already proposes will add £63 billion to people's energy bills. £63 billion, Mr Speaker. The government should instead be fixing the long-standing inequality of grid charging, investing more in onshore and offshore wind, in tidal and in solar, and bringing carbon capture and storage in the north east of Scotland off their reserve bench now. Make it a real net zero transition worthy of the name. They could invest in a national programme of heat pumps, retrofitting and insulating. And I was glad to see his announcement on home energy efficiency and repairs, because this is something we've called on for a very long time, Mr Speaker. But this paltry announcement does not go nearly far enough, not even meeting the significant home energy intervention Scotland is already making. Mr Speaker, this Chancellor has choices. He could have looked at windfall tax and profits, yes, to the Shadow Chancellor, oil and gas, but also Amazon, Serco, Netflix. Why should they not have to pay up for their mega profits during the pandemic? And the Chancellor has had a windfall of his own. Tax revenues are higher than expected. The deficit is £30 billion lower than planned. And looking at the OBR reports that came out today, VAT has gone up by £21.7 billion. £21.7 billion extra in the Chancellor's coffers. And self-assessment up by £5.2 billion than forecast late last year. This could have been used to cushion the cost of living crisis and to invest in renewables and to wean us off fossil fuel. Money-saving expert Martin Lewis was stark in his warning in Sunday Morning. He says, as the money-saving expert who's been known for this, I'm virtually out of tools to help people now. And he said while watching this that his head sunk. There is no help for people on energy. Mr Speaker, in closing, people face a crisis that the Chancellor could have done more to avert, and he's made the choice in so many ways not to act. There's nothing in his announcement today for Scotland. And we on these benches look forward to the day when Scotland has a government with the full fiscal powers to make sure that all of our people, all of them, can have a decent standard of living, and that no child goes to bed with an empty tummy and a cold home.
Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Well, Mr Speaker, the Honourable Lady said there's nothing in this statement for Scotland. Maybe she missed the part about the UK-wide fuel duty cut, which will save a typical, together with the freeze, will save a typical driver £100 this year, typical van driver £200. Maybe she missed the part about the largest increase to personal tax thresholds ever, a £6 billion tax cut, which will help 2.4 million people in Scotland, starting in just a few months' time, or indeed the 75,000 businesses that benefit from the employment allowance. Again, a £1,000 tax cut for Scottish businesses coming in very shortly. And actually what I didn't hear from her, Mr Speaker, she mentioned that Scotland wants, as ever, more fiscal autonomy. Scotland already does have a considerable degree of fiscal autonomy. And what I didn't hear was whether the SNP are going to deliver the same income tax cut for Scottish taxpayers that the UK government is delivering as paid for in these numbers in 2024. I look forward to hearing from the Honourable Lady that the Scottish government will be cutting taxes for their taxpayers with the powers and funding that they will get. Mr Speaker, I always want to make sure that we look after the most vulnerable in our society. The Honourable Lady mentioned a single mother who she knew. I'm pleased and proud, in fact, that because of the actions of this government, increasing the national living wage in April by 6.6%, by cutting the UC taper rate, Mr. Speaker, and indeed by the increase in personal thresholds today, taken all together, all tax and welfare changes. That single mother of 2 children working full-time on the national living wage will now be £1,600 better off. Mr. Speaker, and then the last point I think the Honourable Lady was talking about was on businesses, and again, I'd say to her, we are providing a business rate discount for businesses, and Scotland, of course, has received the Barnett share of that money. Business rate discount here coming in for retail, hospitality and leisure businesses in just a few weeks, and I know the Scottish Government will have the resources to do the same thing. And then lastly, on prepayment meters, where the Honourable Lady made a comment, I'm acutely aware that millions of families rely on prepayment meters, which is why when we designed the energy support package that we announced in February, we had particular care to those people to make sure that they would receive the same benefit. And indeed, we found out and we made sure that 40% of them will automatically get the £200 rebate in October. And for the remainder, Mr. Speaker, we are working with BEIS and the industry to ensure that all of those people get the same benefit as well. They will either receive a voucher, a cheque in the post, or indeed something called a special access message to their phone on SMS, so that when they go to one of the retailers that they use to top up their meter, they will also benefit from the actions that we have taken, because this Conservative government is on the side of everyone, Mr. Speaker.
Chair of the Select Committee, Mel Stride.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I broadly welcome my right honourable friend's statement. The devil, of course, will always be in the detail, and we look forward to seeing him before the Treasury Select Committee next week, along with the OBR and various economists, including the IFS, to which my right honourable friend has alluded. I welcome the cut to fuel duty. It will help both motorists and consumers. It will be important for businesses as well. The VAT reduction around energy efficiency and solar, I think, is very important in terms of the context of the sanctions on Russia at the moment and the importance of energy self-sufficiency where we can achieve it. The hardship fund will be a very targeted measure as well, which I think is important, and I know that small businesses will be delighted to have heard about the increase in the employment allowance to £5,000, which is a key ask of the Federation of Small Businesses. I, along with many others in this House, would like to have seen the national, the NI increases for next year to have been scrapped in their entirety. But I have to say that the increase in the threshold that my right honourable friend has announced today has been very significant indeed, and far more significant than I imagined that it would be. The big question that my right honourable friend, of course, will be asked will be within the context of the fiscal targets that I think we're all agreed we need to meet. Has he used enough of that headroom now, as opposed to having it as a hedge against the uncertainties of the future, to which he alluded and which are very real around inflation and interest rates and the effect of that on the cost of borrowing to the government? So I just wonder whether I could ask him to speak a little bit more about his fiscal headroom. He will have had the advantage of seeing the OBR figures, which I have not, and what his assessment is of that, particularly around the deficit target. Secondly, Madam Deputy Speaker, on the issue of growth, when my right honourable friend has pointed out the OBR downgrades, which are not surprising in a high inflationary environment, and the effect that that will have on consumer demand, the dampening effect, I was very pleased that he referenced his May's lecture, because it is going to be essential that we now focus on innovation, on people, and driving up capital investment. My right honourable friend made reference, I think, to a consultation around how to improve capital investment, where we do currently lag behind our competitors in the G7. And I wonder if he could tell us a little bit more about the timeline for that consultation and when he expects to be able to provide important certainty for businesses in that respect.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank my honourable friend for his words of support. Just to briefly address his two substantive questions. The tax plan published today in the Spring Statement document has a range of options for how one could cut taxes on investment. I look forward to having that conversation with him, colleagues and the business community about the right way to achieve the outcome we want, with final decisions to be announced in the autumn budget to take effect in spring 2023 after the super deduction ends. I won't get into the detail of them now. With regard regard to headroom, we have about 1% of GDP headroom against both the stock and the flow rule, so both the debt falling and the borrowing rule. On the borrowing side, that's about in line with previous chancellors. On the stock rule, it's a bit less. The average over the last decade has been about 1.7%. But what I would say to him is the headroom includes the tax cut in 2024, so that has been fully paid for and costed in these numbers. So I do believe we're taking a responsible and pragmatic approach. But he's right to point out the risk. The OBR have said that relatively small changes in the macroeconomic outlook could wipe out the entire headroom, which is why it's right we continue to be disciplined on public spending.
Order. I would like to try to get everybody in. That means asking one question, not making short statements, but just asking one question so the Chancellor can answer one at the back. Dame Meg Hillier.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Earlier in Prime Minister's questions, the Prime Minister batted off a question about fraud during COVID by suggesting that it was just about delivering. But it was the Chancellor, Madam Deputy Speaker, that gave the ministerial direction for the bounce-back loans to be paid at such speed that even with a 48-hour longer check, they might have avoided the duplicate fraudulent claims that weren't stopped until a month later. That 4.7 billion in fraud would have mitigated some of the measures, for example, the national insurance increase. Does he now regret that he didn't pause for thought and be more cautious on fraud?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I've got a lot of respect for the Honourable Lady, but on this matter I do believe she's wrong, and it's with incredible hindsight to now point out issues that at the time she nor did anybody else raise. And in fact the opposite. I was here on a daily basis being told not to get money out in weeks or months, but to get money out in hours and days. To put longer fraud checks in place would have taken weeks, Madam Deputy Speaker, so I do stand by the decision that we made. We have put various safeguards in place. We have blocked £2 billion of bounce-back loans, 60,000 because of the checks at Companies House. The National Intelligence Service and NCA are now in the process of successfully prosecuting dozens of people. We're striking people off from Companies House, and we're investing more today in the NCA, Natis and the British Business Bank so they can work on the interventions that we know are doing very well. But I do think it is wrong to pretend now that they wanted to do something at the time, which they didn't.
Greg Clark.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I congratulate the Chancellor on a tax-cutting, deficit-cutting, tax-simplifying statement, which is very much in the traditions of Nigel Lawson. He mentions research and development, tax credits, and we have a target to get to 2.4% of investment in R&D across the economy by 2027. Are we on track for that? And when will the changes to R&D tax credits come into effect so that it can increase progress further on that?
My honourable friend for his support, and I know this is an area that he has particular interest and concern for. On the government side, that 2.4% is comprised of two things, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's what the government spends, but also what private businesses spend. I can reassure him we are more than on track for the government bit of that. We already spend the OECD average on the 2.4, and that will go up over the course of this Parliament by 50%. So the government is doing its bit. As I said in the statement in the May's lecture, the private sector lags significantly internationally in terms of how much it spends. The changes we make to R&D will all come into effect in spring next year, announced finally in the autumn budget. I look forward to working with him, his committee and others, and he wrote a forward for a very helpful report on this topic so that we get these changes right and drive up private sector investment in R&D.
Clive Betts.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In the Sheffield Star today, there are two stories. Sheffield is still a city of steel. We have Ben McIver, the president of Forge Solutions Group, a company which employs 400 skilled workers in the steel industry, begging for help with the rising energy costs, as they simply can't pass these costs on to their customers. And we have workers at Liberty Steel protesting about the broken promise from the Prime Minister that if we left the EU, he would cut energy bills for steel companies. Why has the Chancellor chosen to break the Prime Minister's promise?
Well, no, Madam Deputy Speaker, we've provided over £2 billion worth of support for energy-intensive industries over the past several years, including, I believe, over £600 million for the steel industry. That comes in a variety of ways, whether it's free allowances or compensation on some of the ETS and other carbon price mechanisms. We also, in the spending review, announced hundreds of millions of pounds to support industry to make the transition to using cleaner energy.
Louise Villiers.
Spending review, the Chancellor gave a lifeline to maintain nursery schools by confirming supplementary funding, but not all schools qualify for that funding. So can I appeal to him to work with the Education Secretary to identify the modest amount of additional funding needed to put all maintained nursery schools on a stable financial footing for the future?
Well, my right honourable friend has championed this issue consistently since I've had this job, and she deserves enormous credit for that. I'd be very happy to talk to her and take up her proposals with the Department for Education as well.
Sammy Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It would be churlish not to accept that the Chancellor has sought to deal with many of the issues which face working families today. But I believe that given the windfall in taxes which he has experienced, that there could have been more done to help with fuel costs, energy bills and other cost of living increases. It's significant that the Chancellor cannot apply all of his taxes to Northern Ireland because of Northern Ireland Protocol. It shows it need to be dealt with. But Chancellor, the Chancellor started off his statement today referring to Ukraine, and yet surprisingly there is nothing and no mention of additional resources for defence. The defence of this country, the defence of democracy and the defence of the values in face of Putin's aggression. Why is there an absence of this today?
Mr. Speaker, to the honourable gentleman who talked about fiscal windfalls or headroom, I'd refer him to my answer to the honourable member for the chair of the Select Committee. The headrooms we have are actually relatively small by historical standards and could be wiped out very easily by small changes in the macroeconomic outlook. So I think it's wrong to say there is a huge windfall. Indeed, borrowing for this forthcoming year will be higher than the proposal or the forecast was in October. And with regard to defence, again, I'd refer the honourable gentleman to my answer earlier to the lady opposite. We increased defence budget by £24 billion in 2020, the largest increase since the Cold War. It was the only department that got a 4-year settlement at a time when everyone else just got a 1-year. That's how seriously we take the issue.
Hugh Merriman.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I congratulate the Chancellor for this statement, and also, in particular, the 5p reduction in fuel duty, which I note is temporary. And would he remind all members of this House that temporary does not mean permanent, and that if it does become permanent, given it costs £5 billion, we will not be able to reduce income tax, which also costs £5 billion, if we're also to meet our tests of fiscal responsibility?
I thank my honourable friend as ever for his support. He's right. The fuel duty cut will benefit all our constituents, particularly those in more rural areas and on lower incomes. He's also right to make the point, Mr. Speaker, Madam Deputy Speaker, we do need to remain disciplined on public spending. We have fully accounted for the income tax cut in these plans, but it will require collective discipline to deliver those tax cuts and others that we want to see happen over the remainder of this Parliament.
Alison McGovern.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The government have been warned privately and publicly not to make it up when it comes to the employment statistics. So red alarms rang when the Chancellor of the Exchequer glossed over the employment numbers in his statement just now. But the small print reveals, Madam Deputy Speaker, that unemployment is forecast to rise next year and then plateau. So can I ask the Chancellor of the Exchequer, what are the Department for Work and Pensions playing at?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, unemployment is at almost a record low level at the moment at 3.9%. The forecasts are all in the OBR lower than they were in their October forecast, and they all are continually still at very low levels at around 4.2-ish throughout the forecast period. We're very proud of this government's track record on jobs, record numbers of people on payroll. Compared to the forecasts of millions of people unemployed, we've managed to successfully get everyone back to work with a record number of job vacancies, and we will continue to focus on that.
Sir Edward Lee.
With the world economy facing unparalleled challenges from at least 2 of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, death from plague and war, I wonder, for all the challenges facing the Chancellor, if anybody seriously believes that after a decade of unfunded spending promises, tax will be any lower under a Labour government. That's a question I think they should answer. But may I make one question on behalf of pensionable people of pensionable age? More and more are having to wait a long time for so-called minor operations, up to 2 years, very debilitating and very painful. And more people, middle-income people, are dipping into their savings, going into debt to pay for private operations. will the Chancellor have an open mind about giving help to these people with some sort of tax relief, if not on insurance, on the actual cost of the operation if it's delayed for, say, up to 2 years?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm always happy to take suggestions from my honourable friend, but also, he identifies a pressing problem that all of our constituents face, and that's waiting longer than we would like for particularly elective treatment. That's why every penny of our new health and care levy will go to the NHS and social care, so we can make a start on that backlog. We are backing the NHS to get those backlogs down, and my honourable friend is right to raise it.
Sarah Olney.
Much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Households are facing the biggest hit to living standards on record, and they were looking to the Chancellor today to offer them some hope. We also know from the OBR forecast that the Treasury will take an additional £13 billion in VAT thanks to inflation. So can the Chancellor tell us why he hasn't announced an emergency cut to that, as the Liberal Democrats have called for, putting £600 back into the pockets of the average family? That's an unfair tax that puts up prices for every single family in the UK, makes up half of all the taxes paid by the poorest households compared to less than a fifth for the richest. Thank you.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I think it's wrong to say that there has been a VAT windfall. If the Honourable Lady looks at the numbers in the OBR forecast, she will see that their projection for VAT receipts for this forthcoming year are actually lower than their previous forecast in October. But we are helping working families, Madam Deputy Speaker, with a £6 billion tax cut, £330 in the pockets of 30 million workers across the United Kingdom.
Robert Jenrick.
Madam Speaker, well, I think when the Chancellor gets back to his office, that portrait of Nigel Lawson will be looking down admiringly on him. This is a Conservative plan that we can all get behind. It rewards work, it gets the deficit down, and it actually incentivises investment by businesses rather than penalising them with windfall taxes. Energy prices, as my right honourable friend knows, are very volatile, so he's right, I think, to stand by the £9 billion package he brought forward previously and wait until the next update on the energy price cap in late summer. If indeed it does show that energy prices are going to rise very substantially, that will have a big impact on the poorest households. Will my right honourable friend give us an assurance that he will obviously keep this matter under review and will consider further measures, if necessary, to protect the poorest households?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I can reassure thank my honourable friend for his warm words of support, but also reassure him, of course, we keep everything under review. As we have stood by the British people over the past 2 years, we will continue to stand by them, and it's thanks to the responsible decisions of this government that we are able to, when times call, to provide support that is required.
Stephen Malhotra.
Madam Deputy Speaker, consumer spending is vital for the growth of our economy in the aftermath of the pandemic. Yet with inflation now at its highest level for 30 years, he's seen the data, consumer confidence is declining, hitting our small businesses hard and setting back their recovery from the pandemic. So why on earth is the Chancellor not fully U-turning on his NICS rise at this time? A rise which the government itself has admitted will increase inflation and decrease spending power.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Honourable Lady may not have realised that for 70% of people, this is more generous than doing the thing that she suggests. They will pay less tax as a result of this policy, as opposed to the one that she is advocating for. So I believe it's the right policy. We're on the side of hard-working people, and this will help them at a time that they need.
Stephen Hammond.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I thank the Chancellor for his statement today, which has been warmly welcomed by the people and the businesses of Wimbledon, I can tell him. And can I commend him for his analysis of some of the challenges to the economy. One thing he could move from temporary to permanent is the super deduction. And in his consultation, will he look at that? Because I think it's already evident that is the most effective way of changing behaviour and ensuring greater R&D and capital expenditure.
Well, I thank my honourable friend, and I look forward to discussing these topics with him over the coming months. There's a range of options outlined for how to cut taxes on investment in the document today, and hopefully he will have a chance to digest that, and I look forward to discussing it further with him.
Stephen Timms.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The party opposite introduced universal credit, but instead of uprating it in line with current inflation, the Chancellor has chosen to increase the size of the Household Support Fund, which, if you've heard of it, you have to go to the local council for. What evidence does he have, if any, that the Household Support Fund is effective in delivering help to those families who need help most?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, the feedback I get from colleagues is that it has been effective, and local councils, I trust, to know I trust local councils to know in their area who the people are that most need our help. I used to be local government minister, and as the honourable gentleman knows, I have enormous respect and regard for our local authorities. But we didn't just do that, Madam Deputy Speaker. In the autumn budget, we cut the tax rate on universal credit, a £2 billion tax cut for almost 2 million of those on the lowest incomes on universal credit.
Robert Halfon.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I just want to thank my right honourable friends heartily for the fuel duty cut and the raising the threshold for the NI. I hope I can retire from campaigning on this particular issue. My life would be a lot easier, and he has stood up for workers and for people on low incomes, and we should not forget that. As he said, it's this party that is the true workers' party of the United Kingdom. Could I just ask him on the apprenticeship levy, when he looks at the reform, can he make sure that apprenticeships remain at the heart, that it focus on getting more disadvantaged people to do apprentices, young people and people doing degree apprentices?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I thank my honourable friend for his support. I can give him that reassurance. Apprenticeships are fantastic. We want to make sure they're continually supported, but we will look at all aspects to make sure that we're also incentivising the training that we want to see. But he is right, Madam Deputy Speaker, to highlight that this party is the party of the workers, and that is in no large part thanks to his campaigning, and I congratulate him on making that case. Make sure that we're also incentivising the training that we want to see. But he is right, Madam Deputy Speaker, to highlight that this party is the party of the workers, and that is in no large part thanks to his campaigning, and I congratulate him on making that case. So well.
David Linden.
Madam Deputy Speaker, it's quite clear from looking at the Chancellor's statement he wanted